everybody. David Fogel back with you, CEO of the Symphonina Foundation. And I'm joined today by Winifred Phillips. And Winifred is a composer, and I'm gonna put my glasses on. For those of you who can't see at home, my glasses are on now. And I have her new book, Composer's Guide to Game Music. And I'm enjoying it thoroughly. I have to say I have not completed it. I am through about a third of it. It's great. And I want to make a special note to Winifred here. On the back, it says Winifred Phillips is an award-winning composer who has composed music for video games in 5 of the biggest franchises in gaming, including Assassin's Creed, God of War, Total War. It's a lot of war, Winifred. Little Big Planet, and The Sims. And now we're going to add to that she is Grammy nominated. Congratulations.
Thank
you. For Best Score Soundtrack for Video Games and Other Interactive Media this year. Just super. And I had the pleasure of being in line with you at the Hollywood Independent Music Awards earlier this year. We just happened to be right next to each other, which was great. Got a chance to catch up a little bit.
Yeah,
how are you doing today? Yeah, it was fun. It was a good evening, wasn't it?
Yeah, it really was. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing very well. We got a lot of Symphonina things in the works. We got my Symphonina 3 almost completed, and Symphonina 4 probably recording with Budapest in January. I just have to make the final arrangements for that. I was reviewing the score on that just this morning, actually. So a lot of good things. And the composer competition that we have is on right now. It ends on December 10th, and then we'll get to judging, and we'll see, hopefully, we can have a winner and runner-up be on our album for next year to figure all those details out. But in the meantime, let's talk about how you got your start in music in general, and then how you led yourself into composing for this very entertaining niche, literally.
Oh, wow. Okay. Oh, well, I actually started composing in radio. I was the composer for a series called Radio Tales on National Public Radio. It was a series that adapted classic stories of literature for the radio, like Beowulf, Odyssey, The Time Machine, War of the Worlds, The Fall of the House of Usher, The Telltale Heart, things like that. And so I got a chance to compose a lot of music for that project. It was wall-to-wall music. There were essentially dramatizations of storytelling. And I really learned a lot about what it means to be a composer and how to tell stories through music. We did over 100 episodes for that series. And then when it was winding down and I was kind of trying to think about what I was going to do next, I remember I was playing the original Tomb Raider. And I think that it just while I was playing it, the light bulb went on over my head that maybe I could turn a passion for music and my favorite hobby into a career by combining them both. And so I started reaching out to different game development studios to see if there might be any interest. I worked for a little while with a lot of small studios like indies. I did music for a modification of Half-Life with an indie team, and I composed some music for an MMO that never released, and things like that, the kind of things you do at the beginning of your career. So I had some music that I'd composed for that, and I also had a lot of music that I'd composed for the radio series. And at around that time, I had reached out to a music supervisor at Sony Computer Entertainment, and they were looking to put together a composer team for a pretty big project. So my timing was very good, actually. So I spoke to that music supervisor. They were particularly interested in like a choral sound. And that was something I had done repeatedly for the Radio Tales series, for the mythological storytelling in particular. So I had a bunch of choral tracks. I also had composed some choral work for that MMO that never got released. So I was able to share that. And it was enough to convince the music supervisor that we should meet. And he said, "Are you going to E3? Now, E3 is it doesn't exist anymore, so sad to say, but it was the biggest convention of our industry, the Electronic Entertainment Expo. Happened every year and was like a circus atmosphere. It was a huge event. And so I said, of course I was going, which was not true. I had no plans on going.
Going then, yeah, okay.
Yeah, but I absolutely made the arrangements to go.
Yeah.
Hopped on the plane. Never been to LA before, and met with him on the show floor of E3. It was an astounding experience. It's really a blast to the senses. E3 is just fire blowers and people walking around on stilts and huge thunderous sound and screens they just go on forever, and it was just an explosion of grandeur of celebrating video games. And so he took me over to where Sony was showing this new game that was just kind of having its coming out party. It had just been announced, and it was called God of War. So they had a bunch of kiosks where you could see Kratos, who's the main warrior in the game, and he's fighting a bunch of undead Spartans warriors, and he's like hand over hand on a zip line while he's pulling down these skeletal enemies from all around him, and he looks very strong and brutal and determined, and he's bald, he's got very white skin and all of this red paint all over him, and he looks like he's very kinetic looking. And I remember looking up from this gameplay, and they had hanging over the display a full-blown statue of Kratos hanging overhead, holding a Medusa head in his hand, just like Clash of the Titans. And I was sold. It was really exciting, and I kind of felt like the work I'd done up to this point had prepared me for it. It was truly mythological storytelling.
It's great. We have to come back to one acronym that you use twice, because not everybody's in the video game world, for MMO. So if you want to tell us, massively multiplayer online games, maybe, or
yes, it is. It's a massively multiplayer online game, and I think most casual gamers would be familiar with the World of Warcraft type of MMO. EverQuest was one of the earliest MMOs.
I remember that one. Yes.
Yeah. And so that when I was first coming into the game industry was around 2004 was when I was just kind of pounding the pavement. So MMOs were the thing; they were the big deal. So working with a young team aspiring to a game of that depth and breadth. I guess I should have known it was not going to be seeing the light of day, but it was a great opportunity for me to learn. And I did love that team. They had such aspirations, and they were so on fire for it. It's wonderful to work with people who really are true believers and who are really excited about what they're doing.
Just curious, do you keep in touch with any of those people from that original team?
Oh no, I wish I had.
Okay.
Everybody scatters to the far winds.
It's how it goes sometimes, but I figured I should ask, because sometimes we don't. Maybe sometimes we can keep in touch and have these little serendipitous meetings that end up generating lifelong friendships. So that's well. Okay, so I guess one question to ask, which I could save for later, but let me just ask it now. If it hadn't been for video games, what music would you be writing?
Oh gosh. Well, that's a hard question to answer, particularly because my whole philosophy in terms of what direction my life was going to go was whatever paid me money. When I was a youngster, I wanted to either be Gershwin or John Williams, or maybe J.R.R. Tolkien. That's what I really wanted. I wanted to write, or I wanted to make music, and maybe make music for the stage or make music for the screen. And of course, when I was first thinking about this as a little girl, gaming wasn't really something that I thought of as a music career, because it just didn't occur to me really. And the kind of games I was playing didn't really have the sort of music that I would aspire to make. So at least at that time, I mean, I remember being blown away by the choral segment in Final Fantasy VII, and it sort of opened my eyes. You're listening to a MIDI score, so for most of the game, and so it's got that very particular electronic sound. And then all of a sudden, in one of the biggest battles towards the end of the game, you hear this big choir singing, and it's astonishing. It's startling. It really it pulls you into a new reality. And I always thought that choir in games is just such a gut punch of impact. So it was something.
Movies too, right? I mean, like the Star Wars movies, for example. Duel of the Fates comes to mind.
That's true. It really has a lot of power, doesn't it? So that was something that, if I wasn't making game music, because games were really where I found my niche, where I found a really great mode for expression. I suppose I probably would have pursued it in television and film,
Yeah.
but I probably would have also continued to pursue writing and to see which one was going to make a career for me.
Make the winner,
And
huh? Yeah.
yeah, which one won? For me, music won because of the Radio Tales series took off, and then after it, games started really supporting me, and that's where I kind of made the decision. Okay, this feels like a career, and it's exciting. I want to do it.
I don't know how many orchestral or other composers would say they're good writers or great writers, whether it's songwriters or creative writers. But I bet for you, it's a particularly useful talent because you're working in cinematography, essentially in a video game, and you have to express the story. So you have to understand the story, and you have to be able to express it in music, which is very parallel, I think, to how you would tell the story if you were telling it in words, except you're telling it in music. So you have to understand it in two different languages, so to speak, or two mediums, right? Word and music. And so, kudos to you for being able to tell such good. I remember when I was listening to some of the things that you had on your, I think it was your show reel for the Grammy nomination consideration. And I'm going through the different character development things that you have with your music for each character. And I'm like, God, this fits this character so well. And there was one that was like a really creepy, like crypt gas thing or whatever it was. I forget what it was. I'm like, that is so perfect for that. So ominous. And like, how do you write such ominous music? But I guess the answer is you feel it and you practice it. So, when did you start? Did you start on the piano when you were young, or what was your first instrument?
Well, yeah, I think piano was the first serious instrument. I mean, of course, we all play all the kind of the childish instruments, but I do remember mallets were very important to me.
Yeah, kazoo. I did the kazoo also, but we'll set aside kazoo. Yeah, okay.
Of course, mallets actually were important throughout middle school, high school. I was a percussionist for a while, so
Okay.
that was fun. Yeah, enjoyed that very much. And in middle school in particular, I had a really great band teacher who liked to throw me on lots of different kinds of instruments, which because I welcomed it and I really liked trying new things. And so whenever they didn't have somebody playing something, they just throw it at me and I'd see if I could learn it. And I think that was really helpful. It was informative to, at an early age, to just kind of try out all of these different types of musical sound makers and just get a feel for it as a child, as a youngster. It was great fun.
Yeah, so you developed a piano, and then usually most people that I've spoken with kind of have a fork in the road where they either are going to go to performance or they're going to go to composition. Maybe the other fork is that they're not going to do anything and they're going to go, do some other career. But those who stay in music, they're either going to perform or compose. And sometimes it's both. But what was the consideration for you that was like actually the composition part, the creative part was the part that you wanted to pursue?
Yeah, I think I always wanted to compose. Um, I think that was that was the motivation behind being interested in music in the first place. I mean, but I think I was sort of brought up that way. The idea that what you create yourself is the most valuable thing you can do. It's a personal expression. So, not that that being a musician isn't any less valuable. It's still a marvelous career path, and I have such respect for it. But for me, it was just it's a kind of a life philosophy of making things, just creating things was really where the passion was for me. So I think I was always thinking about composing as a career or writing, making story, making narrative, making musical moments, that kind of thing.
Did you go to college for music? Where did you train, or did you train yourself to be a composer?
Oh, well, yes, I did train in college, but I also I'm a classically trained vocalist, so that's a big part of what I do as a composer. I sing in a lot of my projects, so and it matters a lot to me that I have that at my disposal to be able to add voice to pretty much everything. It's been very helpful. So, but a lot of it I self-trained in. I think part of it was that I was very serious about building a studio right from my early days of high school, I was starting to collect gear. And when I came up into college, there were no game development courses, or there were the composition courses I looked at. They weren't taking it from the perspective that I was, which was creating in the studio with keyboards and with MIDI technology and all with everything that was available there. It just the When I came through, that wasn't where
Hmm.
education was going, and so it didn't feel relevant to me at the time. I felt like this is how I'm creating. I need to focus on this. So yes, I did take university instruction in it, but I really felt like I did most of my learning on my own and through work, through radio tales, which I really feel
Yeah.
was very important in growth. Because it was a boot camp for me. It was a lot of music to create for that project.
I
So
bet.
it
Yeah.
really, yeah, I
Yeah.
learned a lot from that.
So tell me, I think you mentioned, I think you said something like, whichever gig was paying better was the one you were going to go for 20 years ago, whatever. But these days, how do you make a choice about what project you want to work on?
Most of the time it feels like serendipity. Projects tend to come to me at the right times. I haven't really had to make too many choices between projects. Things just kind of line up, which I've actually am very fortunate about. There were a couple of times where I had to work on projects simultaneously, but it felt more like ping pong or tennis. I was able to sort of go back and forth from one project to another. And that's fun, particularly if you're working on a lighthearted project and a really dark one at the same time.
Mm.
I was able to sort of work out the schedule so that I could bounce back and forth between something uplifting and then something really dark. And I think it kept it fresh. So I didn't really have to make the choice there. I think maybe there might come a day where my schedule's so tight I have to turn something down, and that'll be sad. But so far, I haven't had to deal with that.
That's good. Okay, so let's offer some things then for people who might like to get into video game composing, and let's take the easy ones. What are the best parts about video game composing?
Oh gosh. Well, the best part well, for me, about video game composing is the relationship you have with the person who's listening to your music. I mean, game music is different from any kind of music you experience in any other form of entertainment. When you listen to music as a passive experience, like in television or in film, you are an observer. You're not doing anything. You are absorbing it. When you hear music while you're gaming, you're active, you're a participant, you're doing something. And psychological studies have shown that music that you hear while you're involved in something that's really engaging, when you're really active, it is remembered more clearly. It makes a stronger impression on the mind, particularly if you associate it with significant moments, like when you're beating a game or when you finally triumph over that really difficult boss. The music really imprints itself because you own it. Then it's not music you observed. Essentially, it's music that was a part of your experience.
Your own theme song, kind of, right?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was. And so you internalize it. It's kind of like music you hear when you get married, or music that you hear when you graduate, or when you first see the person that is going to be, the love of your life, or, that kind of thing. Music in a special moment becomes internalized in a way that it doesn't any other time. And because it's a part of who you are. And I think creating game music is the opportunity to have your music become a part of people's lives in a way that it doesn't when you're just absorbing it passively. Plus, it's just such interesting work. I mean, music in games is dynamic and fluid. It can be taken apart and rearranged by the game engine. So you need to be able to write it in components that can be assembled and disassembled so that it can react to what players are doing. Music in games gives players a sense of agency, because when the music reacts to what the player's doing, it makes the player feel powerful because they made a change. And that's really cool. So as a game composer, we get to create those big moments of satisfaction that gamers experience when what they did makes the music a swell, or makes the music abruptly change. And it's a sense of collaboration between the composer and the gamer. So it's really
Yes.
neat.
So you bring up another question in my mind. I know some composers for film have said that once they're done with their composition, they don't ever watch the film.
Mm.
I guess they've seen it in the editing room so many times they don't ever watch the finished product. Do you play the games that you have composed music for? Do you enjoy them when you play them, or do you like, oh, I'm on to the next project?
Oh no, I absolutely do play the games that I've composed music for. Part of it is I think when you are creating music for a linear piece of entertainment, you know what's going to happen. It's got a beginning, middle, and end. It has beats that are all set out. But for games, it's going to play out different every time. And your music had to be created to be flexible for lots of different circumstances. So it's unpredictable. So even I am not going to know how the music is going to evolve depending upon how I'm doing as a player. That's fun to watch the music react to what I'm doing. Just as it is also fun for me to watch gameplay video on YouTube, watch other players playing who experience games in different ways. There are some players who are wanderers like me and who like to spend a lot of time in different locations and explore and see everything as a mystery and like to look under every leaf and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And the music is really becomes a companion during your nosy explorations through all of these environments, and you have sort of a friendly relationship with the music in that way. But if you are more of a completionist and you rush through games trying to meet every objective, the music is much snappier and it's really changing much faster. It has a more kinetic feeling to it as it moves from one thought to another, and it's like listening to an entirely different score in that circumstance. So it's fun, particularly because I'm not adept at just, speed running a game. To watch somebody else running it quickly and to see how the experience is so much different, that's really cool.
You remind me of how good my kids are at escape rooms and how bad I am. I'm there looking under every leaf, and they're already out of the thing. That's how it goes with them. But I'm glad to have them when I'm there because they get me and my wife out of there. So all right, we touched on the best parts. Let's talk about, if we can, the less than best parts. We're not going to say the worst parts, but just some of the challenges that you have to face that are unique, let's say, to video game composing.
Yeah, I would say the complexities can sometimes be a little daunting. Um, I would point to, just as an example, there's a project that I worked on where the music had to be composed in 6 simultaneous stems. I don't know if you're familiar with stem mixing in
Mhm.
regular orchestration,
Our
but
audience may not be, but I'm intimately familiar. Yes.
yeah. Well, in regular mixing, it would be called stemming. In game development, it's called vertical layering because
Okay.
we picture all of these separate audio recordings as running simultaneously in the game engine. So what you could essentially do is compose a piece of music and then separate it out into different instruments that occupy different recordings that are playing simultaneously. So you can turn them on and off. The engine can adjust their volume levels and
Mhm.
essentially play with the mix. And that allows the music to react to what's going on in the game. And sometimes it's a fairly simple process that resembles the way you would stem any piece of music for a film or a television show. But for this particular project, each stem had to be able to stand alone and be satisfying. And there had to be 6 of them for every composition, with each
Wow.
one being able to stand alone.
Okay.
And that was really challenging. It was in the Little Big Planet franchise. I did several tracks like that for Little Big Planet, and they part of it is the philosophy of those games. There is a play, create, share philosophy. The game creates a sort of a sandbox environment where players, in addition to exploring their ready-made levels, can create their own levels, and they get all these tools where they can create little adventures for their friends and for people on the internet who can explore their catalog of ideas, and it's really cool. But they get the music catalog too to be able to work with, and so they get 6 layers of music for each composition that they can play with. And so knowing that this was going to be manipulated by the game community, you had to think to yourself, okay, each one of these layers has got to work on its own, in addition to being able to work with all of the others in any combination and any volume level. You just don't know what the players are going to do with it. So it's got to be good no matter what happens. And that was really, really challenging.
I can imagine. So all 6 have to work, any 5 have to work, any 4 have to work,
Yeah.
any 3, any pair, and each one by itself.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so that was one of the more complicated situations that I had to
Indeed.
deal with. Yeah, but I found it to be really interesting because it made me think a lot about tone color, the idea that you can create what's essentially a very dense and busy composition, but if you make sure that all of the instruments occupy their own discrete space within the sonic palette per se, you can create something that doesn't feel hectic or muddy. A lot of counterpoint where you'll have like call and response lines that exist in separate layers, so that they feel like little melodies on their own, but when you play them together, you realize they're responding to each other. And
Yep.
things like that, and a lot of just the idea of tone, color, and spreading things carefully out across the EQ spectrum so that everybody had their own territory in which to exist. That was a big part of how to make that composition work. So, and that
So
was fun.
let me ask another challenge then. When you get handed that challenge, so they say, and by the way, we need that by tomorrow at 3 p.m. Or do they give you a little bit more time? That could be a challenge too. What are the deadlines like when you're a video game composer?
Oh, it's just so wide. There's so much variation from team to team. Development teams are sort of like their own little communities, and they all have their own philosophies of being. I mean, I've been brought into development teams that were working on really tight deadlines, and I was brought in very late in the process, so I just have a few weeks to get it done, and so you knuckle down and you do what you do. But then I've also been brought into teams where they were on multi-year cycles and they were working in sprints. So they'd come to me with like small requisitions of tracks, and I would just create a few at a time. And they were working where they were revising their own design on the fly. So I never quite knew where the game development was going to go. So I couldn't plan ahead. And that could be frustrating, but it also was a different way of thinking about music. Just thinking about it in terms of small, like morsels of musical expression, and then just building it out from there, and trying to tie things back to each other retroactively so that at the end it felt like it had a unified idea driving everything. So that was kind of an exercise in seeing common threads or carrying through common motifs, if just very carefully without being able to plan the overall structure. So that I felt like that was an interesting way to think about uh, motif-oriented writing.
It's pretty incredible, really. Actually, I want to ask you about your book. I'm holding it up for the camera here. Okay, hopefully that'll
Hey,
come out in like not backwards like it looks to me. US, Zoom doesn't do us any favors when we're looking at our own thing here, but it puts everything in a mirror. But A Composer's Guide to Game Music, which you wrote, it's new, and I'd like to ask you why you wrote the book.
well, I wrote the book. I started it actually shortly before I began the Assassin's Creed Liberation Project. I didn't know I was going to begin it, so I had already written the proposal for MIT Press, and I think a big part of it was at the time there were a bunch of books for game audio practitioners, but they were sort of for people who did both sound and music, and they focused on the whole discipline, everything that has to do with creating the audio end of a game. So music was talked about, but also sound design and dialogue and all of the other aspects of creating the entire sonic palette of a game experience. And that was great. I bought all those books. I read all of those, but they weren't really written with a composer in mind. So they weren't really answering a lot of the questions that I had as a young, aspiring game composer trying to figure it out. It was much more logistical and technical and just thinking about, get her done. It wasn't really about the kind of creation that I wanted to be doing as a composer of music for games. So there just came a moment where it just seemed like if I wanted a book like that, I was going to need to write it myself.
To write it yourself. That's right.
Yeah, yeah. So, and I'd done a bunch of projects at that point, so I felt like I had enough I could talk about in terms of examples of things that I could point to and experiences. And then, of course, I got hired for Assassin's Creed Liberation, and I had to put the book on the back burner because that really absorbed my time. And afterwards, I had to rewrite half of the book because Liberation was such an enormous experience, and I learned so much about it, being a game composer from that. So, but yeah, that was really the whole thought process behind creating that book. It was about trying to understand what it is to be a game composer. And one of the reasons why I called it a composer's guide to game music was because I wanted it to be specifically pointed towards composers. So that was the reason why I called it that.
Do you think that orchestral composers have any advantage in video game composition as opposed to, say, people in other genres, whether that might be reggae or anything, or do you just have to be good, at least competent, in basically all genres so that you can evoke whatever musical feeling you want at a particular time?
Well, that's a good question. It depends on the genre of game you want to be scoring. I mean, if you are really into role-playing games with a sort of a lush, expansive feel to them, orchestral composing is going to be something you'd want to have under your belt because that's really a part of the texture of that kind of gaming. But if you are a pop composer, as long as you have a firm grasp of narrative musicality, if you can tell stories with your music, and also if you can wrap your music around what's happening in a game. I find that understanding the kinetics and the visual storytelling of the game is really important in order to be able to create music that supports it and feels like it belongs. So it's very different from traditional songwriting. It needs to adapt to the energy of gameplay. I like to have a video of gameplay running while I'm composing, in addition to being able to play the game separately just to get a sense of how it plays. While I'm composing, I like to have the gameplay running in a loop on a screen in front of me so that I have that constant reference to how the game looks and feels and the energy of it, so that the music supports gameplay for whatever music I'm creating, for whatever circumstance is happening in the game at that time.
And when you're composing, do you find your composition goes in a series of layers of refinements, or you get an idea and it's all in your head and it's on the paper, and so to speak? We don't have paper anymore, but you know what I mean.
I know what you mean. I go through phases with that. There used to be a time in which I liked to pound everything out into piano first and sort of MIDI, get it all in MIDI as like a placeholder, with everything just sort of all of the different orchestral lines just represented in different tracks of MIDI, so that I could then go through and execute with the instruments later, and just adapt it to what would best suit performance. I used to do it like that, so it'd be kind of like getting it all down first and then thinking about the execution. But lately I've been sort of more piecemeal about it. I do like to bring in the live instrumentation sometimes during the creative process. And I also like to think more about the orchestral texture and color while I'm sort of creating the structure of it and the shape of the melodic lines, the way the music ebbs and flows. So yeah, it's changed depending upon what I'm doing. I mean, there was a project that I worked on that was very minimal in its structure. It had that Steve Reich, John Adams sort of vibe going on about it, and that I really just stabbed out in piano just to get all of the structure, because it really felt like an edifice. You had to have the entire thing built or it would all fall. So just to get that all done first, and then to sort of pull in the instrumentation, it just seemed like the way to go. But it's different for every project, depends on the tools you're working with and what you're trying to accomplish.
And when you're working on a project, how often are you working kind of in your own silo for what you're doing versus how often are you working with another composer or a team of composers?
Well, I have definitely worked with teams, but we also, in the game development situation, we all tend to be remote, so we're not working in the same location. And for most of the team experiences I've had, we're assigned different tracks according to what our strengths are and what the development team is looking for us to provide to them. So the actual collaboration tends to not be as much as you might imagine for a composer team, particularly if you're talking about a team where everybody's in one place, and like one of those teams of composers that are under one banner head, and they've got there are various outfits like that, and I imagine there's a lot of collaboration under those roofs. But for the teams I've worked with, we've all been remote, and we've worked on different tracks, and they've all been brought together under one vision. So in that case, it really was the music supervisor or the audio director who guided everybody and made sure we were all on the same page, and that the overall feel of the score was going to work, that everything we were doing was sort of following a singular vision.
Yeah. Would you say, you mentioned John Williams and Gershwin earlier, would you say those are your strongest composer influences, or who else has been influential that you would like to pay homage to?
Yeah, as a kid, yeah, absolutely, and Bernstein, and
Mhm.
that kind of that kind of music composition was important to me when I was young. I mean, as I grew up, I took in a lot of other kinds of music, and now I listen to pretty much every kind of thing. Partly because I never know what my projects are going to, ask of me. Like for Wizardry, Proving Grounds of the Mad Overlord, it was all medieval music and Renaissance music, and I was doing a ton of research into those forms and those instruments, and it
That's a
was
good point
fantastic.
we haven't brought up too, because you have to create music that's, I've been stepping you, but you have to create music that's faithful to what it is that the gameplay is, and the genre of the game, and the timing of the game. And so uh, all of a sudden you're a historian rather than a composer, at least for a time, until you figure out how to incorporate that history, right? So it's it's not just the composition; it's understanding how the composition fits in its own realm, so to speak.
Absolutely, that is so true. The and it's actually really a lot of fun to do that. I've had a chance to do that kind of research for a lot of projects, and I really enjoy it every time. For Wizardry, it was just amazing, and part of it was just because the game is inspired by D&D. It's tabletop role playing fantasy gaming, and the original 1981 game from Surtech was like one of the first games inspired by D&D tabletop role playing games. So it was trying to bring that experience into the computer realm. So creating a piece of music to support that, it really required understanding the inspiration of that kind of fantasy world, and yeah.
So not to date myself too much here, but 1981, I remember. So we have a Commodore 64, maybe an Apple II, little
Mhm.
limited on what it is that you can load up on that machine. You've got a 5 1/4 inch floppy drive with probably 440 kbytes of data on one disk. You might need 5 disks to load your game or something, but
Yeah.
I think part of the limitation there limits the music a little bit, at least. Whereas today it's almost a completely immersive real life experience. Depends on what you're doing, but it can be. So
Yeah.
it opens up the opportunities for you to compose things that are expressive to whatever that is that we can see now in that virtual reality, but also just the computer hardware can make it happen so much faster that, again, you can have six stems with six choose anything, as we say in math, combinations where they all have to work. And guess what? They probably have some chance of all of them happening in the gameplay across a massively multiplayer online situation. So you got to play. We didn't have that back in 1981. I can tell you, when we were playing Dungeons and Dragons or doing those first video games. So for sure,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah. But one of the things that's really cool is the original game had no music. It was developed on the Apple II for in Pascal, and there was no music in it at all. So when Digital Eclipse developed the remake, they used the Unreal Engine to create this fleshed out world for this game that was basically a lot of text and some white lines
There you
for
go.
the dungeon. So it's amazing what they were able to accomplish, but it gave me a lot of creative freedom to define what musically could exist in this game. And I had a great fun with it.
Did you ever do any computer programming too growing up, Winifred? Or?
Oh, no, no, no.
No?
That no, no, that
Okay.
was not my strength. No,
No, that's okay.
virtual instrument programming, not, yeah,
It
but
counts
that,
it counts to a degree. That's okay. We don't have to compile anything. You can all just run it with an interpreter, so to speak, when you're doing music. Do you have a second book in mind already, or is that going to have to wait for us?
yeah, I think it's gonna have to wait a little while. I've been pretty packed with projects. Actually, I've got a second project coming out. The Flint Treasure of Oblivion game is coming out later this month, so I'm
Oh
looking forward
wow,
to that.
okay.
It's a pirate
So
game.
that's a Christmas release.
Yeah, yeah. It's a game all about pirates. So it's based on Treasure Island. So Captain Flint of Treasure Island. So
More
that's fun.
historical research for you, and
Yeah, it was fun.
and then what do you have planned for next year? We've got the Grammy event on February
Yes.
2nd, and we wish you all the best for that. And congratulations again on your nomination. It's well deserved. What else do you have for 2025?
Oh gosh. Well, there are several irons in the fire, but I can't talk about them. That's
Okay.
kind of the nature of game development. It sort of stems out of the culture of software development, where there are non-disclosures and nobody
Mhm.
can talk about anything they're working on. And game developers kind of share that same sort of protective attitude about things. So, but yeah, I have a few things in the fire that I'm currently working on and kind of excited about. So I'll be looking forward to sharing more about that.
We will stand by, and we'll be happy to hear more from you. And again, I want to recommend all of our composers there who are interested in video game composing, really film composing too. I think I've already gleaned some things that I think are helpful to cross between composing for different media. A Composer's Guide to Game Music by Winifred Phillips. Winifred, if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do so?
Well, you can go to my website, winifredphillips.com. I'm also on most of the social media, Facebook, Instagram, X, and and so you can find me there. And I will be great. I would love to meet people.
Winifred, on behalf of the Symphonina Foundation, we appreciate you bringing orchestral music to young people and older people all around the world for our enjoyment, and we wish you all the best of success with your Grammy nomination and consideration and everything for 2025.
Thank you so much. This was a pleasure.